All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, your host, hour number 2. Still the third day of January 2013. If you're listening and not in the chat, let me check that real quick here. We have about 52 people in the chat. You can join them by going to wideawakenews.com, clicking on the Wide Awake Radio microphone, and that'll take you into chat. If you have questions, you can post them in there. If you have questions for myself or Kristen, Kristen, are you monitoring the chat right now?
I'm trying to at the moment.
Okay. I know you got a lot of windows open, so do I. But if you have questions,
I got two computers going here too.
Okay, all right. Well, drop your questions in there. But if we're not covering them, feel free to call in at 877-342-6673. It's been a while since we've had Kristen on. Welcome back to the program. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me again.
By the way, if you're not watching on Justin TV, she's wearing a T-shirt. What does it say?
It says "Good people nullify bad laws," and it has the Google search box. It says Google jury nullification.
Yeah, I love that. That's completely awesome. What's new? What's going on? Last time we had you on here, I think you were still a government employee, but you were moving away from that. So give us a little bit of history about you and what brought you into this movement, this genre.
Well, yes, I am very proud to say that after 11 years, I left the federal government and now work in the private sector. So that's exciting and quite the difference, because I had a big mouth before, but now I have nothing holding
you back. Yeah.
Yes.
That is awesome. But your history when you were in the military, see, we just touched on that. If my memory serves right, which it might not, because for some reason I thought your former Army fiance was a Marine, but anyway, so my memory might be slipping. But we just started to touch on the topic of chemtrails, and you saw these things for yourself, and you tested them for yourself around different bases, correct?
At one particular base. My job in the Air Force was bioenvironmental engineering, and basically that encompasses health standards and also environmental standards. So I used to do, let's say, like, there was a fuel spill or something like that. We would do a lot of soil remediation sampling and things like that. And, I started to wake up to my little world wasn't what I thought it was. And around 2006 is when I, quote, woke up. And I remember hearing about chemtrails and thinking it's just a crazy conspiracy theory. And when I started, trying to look into the differences between chemtrails and contrails, I started to realize all these photographs people were posting, I see those every day. And this is when I was in Oklahoma City. And I started to follow the information other people were posting. It's always unmarked airplanes shaped like, aircraft I knew we had on our base.
Right.
And
C-135s or something?
Yeah, KC-135s and C-130s. And I started to realize that these aircraft, the purpose of the base I was at was a depot maintenance base. So basically every 10 to 15 years, they take apart the aircraft down to the last screw. So, it was like the little windows started falling in. I'm like, okay, unmarked planes, they leave them white after they sand them and repaint them. And also we were responsible for approving hazardous materials that would come onto the base. Mm-hmm. So when you start to see material safety data sheets, they're known as MSDSs, for canisters containing carcinogenic metals and oxides and powders, I thought, it was like this cloud that came over me of, oh my gosh, explicit. This is here. This is happening here. And so I did my own sampling, some soil grid sampling is what it is called, because I actually lived off base, but literally my backyard was the flight line. So I started paying attention to the spray patterns. I started paying attention to things that I knew from my job and when they would fly and when I would see the trails. So 8 hours afterwards, because I did a long story, but dissipation rates of these materials, when it would hit the soil sampling. And actually attempted to get them looked at by the EPA, but they refused. So I did my own. And it came back. Barium in the soil. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold. Barium in the soil. Aluminum. And see, the thing is when you do soil sampling, there's a lot of naturally occurring things in earth, that are just there. But not at these levels and not at these constituents. And ever since then, I've kind of given the information out little by little because I figured this is the one thing that would really kind of raise some eyebrows for people in that area. But they're
Right.
definitely real. And for those who call it a conspiracy, I actually laugh at them because I think, there's some people you could give them the proof and they won't believe it, but they're real.
That's a fact, and I appreciate you coming on, even though you're under the weather. But to that point, Dinah Snyder and myself last night were talking about this after the program or during one of the breaks. The you know there's just and this might be just me playing this out of my own head here, but there seems to be a lot of people with ailments that are like mine, that are like yours, that are like so many people that I talk to, that are and some people are calling it asthma, some are calling it bronchitis, some are calling it just seasonal colds, but it certainly seems to me that this is on the uptick. You talked about MSDS sheets. I'm very familiar with them. I was in charge of when I was in the Army. I was in charge of our company's oil analysis program, and so I'm familiar with MSDS, and in business, anything that you buy or sell overseas or that contains chemicals must have an MSDS sheet to go with it. Did you pursue any of this when you were in the military? You're seeing these MSDS sheets for barium and other carcinogens. Did you happen to ask anybody or get an opinion from anybody? Now, I know in Chicago, this is again memory, I hope I'm right here. You were in Chicago, and one of your heroes at the EPA, you actually had a
Yes,
chance to talk to him. Is that right?
that is correct. Let me answer your first part of your question.
Okay. Yeah.
This was in 2007, 2007, early 2008, that I did the sampling. Right after that happened, I was actually going to relocate to a different base. And this was like my coming out of the closet as like a truther, and I really feared reprisal. So I kept it to myself. And lo and behold, they sent me to the only other air logistics center in the Air Force. So then I went to Georgia, and I didn't see it happen there, but things started happening at that base that, I told you before, I left as a whistleblower for a different reason. And I've really held on to it because it wasn't until recently I left the federal government. And, I wanted to wait until I got out of the federal government to start talking about this because there's no way my security clearance would get renewed. So,
Right. But
but
now you're out. Now
I
you're
am
out.
out.
You're out, and
But
we're gonna come up to a break. But before we do, I want to make sure I give out your website. I didn't do it at the beginning of the program. Sugardecoded.com is your up and coming website, and I'll let everybody know that it's under construction right now. You can still go there, but there's a lot more information coming to that website. Is this kind of information what you're going to post there? I mean, what you've experienced in your military career, what you're finding, through your own work as a truther. I mean, is this kind of information here, or is it, what kind of info you have in here?
it's going to be, yes, personal blogs, me kind of airing out a lot of things that I've been waiting to talk about. And also just to kind of piggyback off of current news stories and kind of give an insight because I have worked for the government for so long in different departments and different agencies that a lot of environmental things, fraud, waste, and abuse, things I want to talk about and just give a different perspective on because I'm kind of known as the loudmouth liberty enforcer. So I say things that people wish they could say, but now I don't care, So I'm going to be like the edge loudmouth. I'm going to be doing my daily blogs.
Well, I can't wait to get some samples of some of them. When's it going to be complete? I guess is what we're looking for, or when's it going to be fully up and running?
Um, towards and within the next 2 weeks, I've actually uploaded kind of my background, how I got started in this. It's kind of, a news site, but also I share personal information like across the spectrum. I tell my story about when I had cancer and weight loss tips for women, things like that. So it covers a broad range of truther things. And like I said, nothing sugar coated. I tell you how it is.
Very cool. All right, we're going to be back in just a few minutes with Kristen. More Wide Awake News Radio. Guys, hang tight. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath along with Kristen, Meghan. If you were listening on Justin TV, we have 46 people on Justin TV. You can watch us there. You can access that link. You know what? we have this many people in there because we have a girl live on camera. I'm convinced of it. Because if you weren't in here, Kristen, we'd have 12 people in there, and we'd have the rest in the chat room. They wanted to see that shirt you're wearing, and it's worth seeing. So go over to Justin TV and check it out. You can get into the chat.
Let me give them a little preview of the shirt. If people
Oh,
can
what?
see it.
That's a very nice shirt.
No funny business.
Now watch. Let's see. I want to see where it goes. This is about a 30-second delay. It's probably going to go to 100 people in there. All right. You can get in the chat room, wideawakenews.com, Wide Awake radio button on the right-hand side, the radio microphone. That'll take you in. There's 65 people in the chat. And I mispronounced Kristen's website because I said sugar decoded, and it's not. Well, it's sugar decoated, like a DECOATED.com, sugardecoded.com, or you can find her on Facebook as well, Kristen Meghan on Facebook. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's just Kristen Meghan, Kristen Meghan.
Perfect. Okay, this is our short segment with you. I want you to finish up that story about the EPA because Kristen was telling us her experience in the military. She saw the MSDS reports with these chemicals, saw the planes, and had a chance to speak to somebody fairly high up in the EPA. So please continue with that story.
Yeah, actually, why I worked for the federal government. Sorry, I'm trying to close out the chat room sound here.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going into a bronchial spasm there. I was like...
No. When I worked for the federal government, I actually had, I worked as an industrial hygienist and an environmental specialist. So I was getting inspected by the EPA for the Clean Air Act. And this inspector was just really odd. And to make a long story short, at the end, I found out he basically was awake. And I noticed that he followed some things that I followed. And I asked, between me and you on the sidelines, what do you know about geoengineering? He said, chemtrails. And he whipped out his camera and he had like 500 images that he's taken from chemtrails in the area. And he told me how he was very high ranking in the EPA. He's worked there for 25 plus years. And he said he's tried to bring it to the attention of his directors. And he gets the old shut up and color, response.
Yeah.
And when he retires, we actually keep in contact now. So when he retires, he's willing to come and talk about it with anybody because once again, he doesn't have to worry about, losing.
How much time does he have left before he retires?
I think like two more years.
Unreal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is people, so there are people inside our government, inside, the military who understand what's going on and are afraid of reprisal, and rightfully so. I mean, I don't know how high up he was. What his GS ranking was.
I think he was a GS 13 and I was a GS 12. So, I mean, yeah, we definitely are friends now. We keep in contact via email and he lives near me. So,
any formulation or any answer he gave you that led you to believe he understood what he thought was going on? That's what I'm looking for. Did he speculate on what he thought was going on with 500 images on his camera? He must have.
Well, he started to go into Agenda 21, and
okay, all right.
And we only had, even though we talked for 2 hours, we were like in the office, so we had to kind of whisper, and people were like, "Why is she getting friendly with the EPA guy?" But yeah, he has a lot of information. I can't wait for him to come forward because it's like somebody else to back up that I'm not crazy. And I know there's a lot of other EPA people that have to be aware of this because a lot of people, I read a study, somebody else tried to submit samples to, soil samples to the EPA. And this was before I even was awake to it, I think in 2004. And the EPA refused to run the samples. So, I mean, this has got to be going on. Just people are afraid to speak of it or don't believe it and don't care to.
Well, it's so easy, it's so easy to take evidence and just we can have, as far as like in the financial end of things, we can have the largest transfer of wealth in the history of this, in the history of the planet, private failure onto the public. And it's easy to hide that through the mainstream. It's easy to hide that by government officials just refusing to even comment or touch onto the subject. So when it comes to things like chemtrails, or when it comes to things like, in the Gulf, during the ongoing crisis of the oil spill, the BP oil spill. You know, even though you can prove that Corexit is making people ill and people are sick and dying because of it, so what? You know, it just doesn't go anywhere. You know,
And
go ahead.
and to add to that too is, I mean, people could not believe me, and honestly, I don't care. But there are tons of professionals that are coming forward, like you said, all these rise in respiratory and neurological disorders and illnesses are all heightened in the last 10 years.
That's a
I mean,
fact. Yeah.
asthma has skyrocketed, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I go and visit the site Health Freedom News, and they
Hold
have
on.
a neurologist.
Hold on one second. We're going to take this. This was the
Okay.
short segment, so we'll pick it up on asthma on the backside of this break. I definitely want to talk about your TSA experience and then talk about some PTSD before the show is over tonight. We're going to be back with Kristen, Meghan, more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute, guys. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, your host. Kirsten Meghan is our guest. You were just telling me during the break that you took you wanted to address something that just popped up in the chat room, Kirsten. What was it? Go ahead.
Yeah. A friend of mine, his name is Scott Tips. I'm trying to get the exact link because I always get it confused with a different website, but it's a site where you can go to, and it provides information from vaccine liberation to a lot of people. Like, if I know within my family, you have that division in the household of people think you're nuts or they don't believe it because they want to hear it from a professional. Well,
Right.
there's a world-renowned neurosurgeon who's come forward and said, yes, chemtrails are creating a rise in ailments related to respiratory disease, neurological disorders, talks about the rise in Alzheimer's and autism linked to these heavy metals. So I love using this site. Actually, I'm in grad school right now, and my professors don't like me to cite .coms and .edus. So they actually have a magazine that you can subscribe to. So I like to use that I'm allowed to cite magazines. So I'm able to get kind of that alternative information out.
Is it National Health Federation?
I think so, actually.
Okay.
And the only reason I'm confused on it right now is because I always get it mixed with natural news.
Yeah, somebody dropped that in the chat, natural news. This one is the National Health Federation. The website is www.thenhf.com. Does that sound right?
No, I think it's different. But okay. You know what? I will get the information for you. I don't know why I'm having. Maybe it's the chemtrails getting to me.
It's getting to both of us.
I have a magazine down on my.
Let's see. Editor of Health Freedom News. How about that? Scott, a brief biography of Scott Tips, JD, editor of Health Freedom News.
Yep, that is it.
Okay. All right. Well, so we'll get that link. And I think he was just interviewed by this Health Federation. But Health Freedom News looks like it's his work there. Well, that's great. I mean, and it's great that it isn't great. I mean, it's unfortunate that somebody like you that actually went out there and did the testing. You did a grid test on an area where you absolutely could prove without a doubt that these extraordinary levels of chemtrail debris. But they're not going to listen to you. It's also unfortunate. And I guess this is kind of the crux of it. You have a GS13, whatever he is. You were GS12, and it is unfortunate that so many people are afraid to come out and say something. Now, you weren't. Even when you were working in government, you were still, you were tentative somewhat, but you would still come out and do it. And we need more people like that. I haven't seen Scott's work yet, but I certainly will after this. But it is great that there are so-called experts coming out and trying to shed some light on it. I told you during the break that with my doctor I go to, he's a specialist in allergy and asthma. Just talking to him I asked him about the frequency of people coming in with these type of symptoms, and he said it's off the charts.
Yeah, it most certainly is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's go. I want to talk a little bit about the TSA thing that you wanted to share with us tonight. So let's jump over to that.
Well,
what happened with the TSA?
I like to call them something else, but if anyone is watching that already knows about me and knows about my loudmouth, I am very, very against the TSA. Not just for the basic reasons of it violates our Fourth Amendment, but I'm very open about the fact that I do have PTSD. from being in the military due to sexual assault. So I fly a lot. I travel, and as easy as it is for people to say don't fly, I'm in Chicago, so I can't take a train either. Um, I've had multiple run-ins with the TSA, but my most recent one, I was actually down in Nashville, and I was flying back to Chicago, and I always opt out. I'm also have background in radiation, so I do not go through the scanners. And even though I know I'm gonna be groped, I that's like a physical demon versus it unzipping my DNA. So this time when I went through, the TSA lady took me back to the room and opened up this binder. And I fly a lot, so this was new to me. I'm like, why am I putting this binder? And I did a video about it on YouTube that goes more in depth, but basically now at this airport in Nashville, they're tracking, they take down all the information from your boarding pass and write who is opting out, not just opting out, but who's opting out for the private screenings. And this took about 6 TSA agents before I would, let them put me in their binder because I thought this is new. And they tried to explain to me that it wasn't. And it most certainly was, at least at that airport, because I'm traveling all the time. So I don't know if that was an intimidation tactic or some, pardon me, or a database to later label me as a domestic
Well,
terrorist. I don't know.
There's a fact that there's two different lists. You can go on a no-fly list, or you can go on the special guest list, and how they populate either one of these is basically a mystery to the public. I don't know how we have a no-fly list that has over 1 million people on it. How did that happen? Who found these people, to be belligerent actors and couldn't get on an airplane? And the other list is compiled of people that potentially, could be deemed belligerent actors. So they're selected. That when you get your boarding pass and you got all those little S's at the bottom, guess what? That means you're going to get felt up.
And the best part is, I was still a government employee with my badge, and still have a security clearance. So if I'm so crazy, pardon me, and I can't fly, why are you trusting me with all this other information? It's ludicrous.
It's completely ludicrous. And I happen to be good friends with somebody who's a member of the TSA. And I mean, he's not high ranking in TSA. And in honesty, him and I used to run together. And he's told me in the past that they don't and this is another case of people just doing their job, and how, that in a lot of ways is a cop out. People are just doing their job, but it doesn't make any sense to them. And a lot of these TSA folks, I have to think by talking to folks who are in TSA, they don't understand what the hell they're doing. They don't understand, what the procedures, how it's stopping anybody. They haven't stopped any terrorism in this country. How is it when I opt out? How is me standing there and having some guy put his hand down my pants? What on earth are we doing in this country? What are we doing to each other? Everybody's just whittled down to the lowest common denominator as being a threat against the system. It's crazy. Go ahead.
Pardon me. It's nuts. And when I did work for the federal government, I would attend training at. You're familiar with what OSHA is.
Right.
And I would do OSHA training because the institute's here in Chicago. And I actually sat in a class going over radiation, actually, and hazardous communication with employees. And I asked, there was 3 high-ranking regional safety officers for the TSA. So these had to be GS-13 and above. And I asked one guy, I said, in all honesty, I should actually show him this picture I have mocking the TSA. And I said, why is there no independent studies? Like, we all know this violates OSHA standards. Why are we, and OSHA targets federal agencies because they know we're the worst at what we're supposed to enforce. And then they told me that they are getting an independent study. And they told me it was CHIPM, which I laughed because this guy doesn't realize CHIPM is a part of the Army. It's what the Army uses overseas. So here we are having another government entity supposedly doing radiation studies on the government. And that's, to me, a huge conflict of interest. And I know that they're not doing it. I know they're not.
Right. Well, the conflict of interest runs amok throughout government and not only government, but government and special private interest. We saw that in what Eric brought in the first hour with the Naomi Wolf Freedom of Information Act, where government's colluding with banking interests in a very much totalitarian way. All right, we have a caller, Richard from Washington, and Richard, we're going to try to get you on the backside of this break, so hang tight. We're going to be right back with Kristen, Meghan, more Wide Awake News Radio in just a few minutes. Hang tight. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath. We're going to go to Richard from Washington because he's been holding for a little bit. Richard, how are you tonight? What's on your mind?
Same thing as always. I missed last night's show with Dina, but I talked to her at length after I left my number, and we pretty much were in total agreement. And the situation is such that what is happening to us is called a stress or a toxin load, and it's a combination of all the things that we're being dealt with. But as Dina and I talked about, 80% of that load is we've been confused as to what food is for our biochemical nature of our body. We are designed and only made of proteins and fats, hopefully in the ideal non-heated condition. But any intake of carbohydrates triggers a cascade of events, sympathetic response, insulin production, et cetera, that totally destroys the body. And you're both suffering from that right now. You guys got histamine responses because you are overloading on carbohydrates.
No, that's not accurate. I don't
eat carbs.
Right. Yeah, I don't eat carbs at all. I mean, very little.
Everybody always tells me that, and then I ask them what they eat, and everything they eat is carbs.
Well,
I don't think we understand what food is anymore.
No, there are carbs in even broccoli. I get what you're saying, but
yeah, but she's not loading up.
The only thing that we can eat if it's not a carb is an animal. So what you're telling me, both of you are just eating animal products.
I eat lean meats and green vegetables, but I agree with you. I do know that there are carbohydrates and a lot of greens actually, but I don't eat any additional carbs.
No, greens are all carbohydrates. There's nothing in anything but an animal product but carbohydrate. And you can say, oh, well, they're made of proteins and fats. But if you do the radioisotope uptake studies, that stuff cannot be processed by a non-functioning digestive system. And if you eat carbs, you turn off your digestive system. That's the key. That's the clue. And I don't want to, stress my point too much because you guys got a show to do. I'll leave my number. If you want the clue, you want to talk about it, you can call me and I will give you an earful as to exactly what the situation is. But it's a great show. I appreciate the information you're providing and keep going.
All right, man. Thank you. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Yeah, we've had Richard call before and talk about that, and and apparently I'm gonna have to do a program and get him on here and let him.
That would be good because I also on the side I'm very big into fitness. I've studied nutrition for years. He's right. There's a lot of carbs. We visualize carbs as potatoes and breads, but yes, they're in a lot of greens. But you do need carbs. Carbs are fuel. But I'm not familiar with it causing a lot of different effects to the body that he's referring to. So I'd be interested in a show like that.
Sure, you bet. All right, let's move on. We were talking about your TSA experience, and with about 7 or 8 minutes left here, let's talk a little bit about PTSD because you're in the former military, you suffer from it. You brought up something to me in one of the breaks, one of the first breaks that I thought was really, really interesting, which is more of a separation anxiety type PTSD that I've never really even given a lot of thought to. Maybe because I didn't spend as many years in the military as you did, but break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, my PTSD is different. There's PTSD. There's a stigma that if you have PTSD, it's got to be combat related. You can get in a car accident and have PTSD from that and never want to get in a car again. But there's for those of you that didn't know, I worked for the VA, the VHA, the Veterans Health Administration. Although I'm not a provider, I'm preventive medicine, but I did see a lot of PTSD cases where it's a transitional effect. It's people that are so institutionalized by being in the military that when they transition into civilian life, they're so full of anxiety and they're so afraid of the reprisal of, in the military, you're late, you get paperwork, and then you can get kicked out and then you lose your income. Or in the private sector, down to the simple things of, wow, I can call in sick. I don't have to go to, we called it the sick call in the Air Force. You can be more liberated, and these people can adjust. And they're so used to that structure that they are so full of anxiety. They actually people were fainting. I mean, there's many forms of PTSD, but, kind of piggybacking off the show from last night, I'm very versed in different types of PTSD, and also how, the VA likes to give you every script under the sun and actually avoid real rehabilitation programs and natural cures or treatments, not necessarily a cure. So,
well, I want to get back to the. So, what is the PTSD? The separation PTSD? I mean, is that actually classified, or is that classified as a
lot of people
under general
think
PTSD?
It's just under PTSD, and in the VA ratings, it'll just say PTSD, and it'll have like mine actually says PTSD due to assault.
Okay.
So you'll have PTSD, social anxiety from an episode that happened to you. I don't know, because every situation, it could be, I know some have been called transitional PTSD. It's anxiety disorders. They label as PTSD because it happened because of their military lifestyle. So there's a lot of false information and rhetoric out there about PTSD. It's not just, I was fearful, I got blown up. That is severe PTSD, hearing the gunshots, car backfiring. But there's so many other forms of PTSD.
Post-traumatic stress. So any traumatic stress.
Exactly.
And the stress could be, like you said, and I thought it was a good point because you're fairly young still, and if you were in the military for 10 years, that means you went in when you were you were a teenager still, right? Maybe in your early 20s.
I went to school for a little while, had a job. I went in at 19.
At 19, so 19 to 29 years old, let's say you were in the military.
I'm 30.5 no.
30 and a half. You're young if you still put a half in front of it. But that's a big chunk of your adulthood that, even though the Air Force is kind of lax and really discipline goes out the window in the Air Force. I'm just kidding. I was just trying to.
No, it's
true. But you're being told what to do every minute, especially if you're single and you're living on base. You're told what to do from the second you get up, and you're going to go exercise with the group, and you're going to go eat with the group. And if you're sick, you're going to tell whatever your squad leader or whatever the case is, and go to sick call. You really don't do anything. You have a little bit of free time in the evenings or the weekends, but you really don't do anything that isn't completely and totally and utterly structured.
It's structural and social collectivism. If you went in young and you don't know any different, you literally, and this has nothing to do with intelligence, you can't think for yourself, and you can't transition into civilian life or civilian workforce, because when I actually transitioned, my boss always made fun of me, like, hey, FYI, you don't have to tell me everything. I don't need a doctor's note. Like, I was so used to having to justify being sick or justify taking vacation, and there's so many different freedoms out there, what we have left. When you transition, people just they're pardon me, they're their own worst enemy, and they just can't deal with it. It causes so much anxiety that these people can't go to work.
Yeah.
So,
well, and if you're talking in a work atmosphere, well, let's not forget you're finishing work wherever you were if you were in this maintenance base. So if you're working in some lab on post and you're not leaving post, you're staying right there. I mean, your whole world is wrapped up in the military. So that I can certainly see it. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was interesting that you brought that up, because it's something I never thought about. I understand. I understand because I have relatives who are suffering from PTSD because they were in a combat situation, and very, very stressful, obviously. But I could certainly see it just in being in that collective circumstance for that long, going in that young, not knowing anything different. You come out, and you're just thrown into it. You're thrown into the mix. So definitely interesting. Did you talk? Did you say you talked to Dinah after the program, or you just read her material?
Pardon me. Actually, I read some material, her research information, and actually started. We friended each other on Facebook. I haven't spoke to her one-on-one, but I definitely would like to because, you know, a lot of stuff that was included in her study. I mean, I saw it firsthand working in the VA. You know, I actually, without saying names, I have a friend on Facebook who recently became homeless due to, you know, the economy. This person actually has a degree, and this person is now went to a VA shelter to get back on their feet, but self-medicates with marijuana due to their, you know, PTSD or whatever issues they're taking it for, and was bummed that even in the state that this person's in, it's now legal. They couldn't bring it into the VA because it's now federally funded, and offered the person medication instead. And I just thought, well, go figure, you know, they pump you up on all these meds. And then what happens is they get kickback money once you're addicted to it and put you in this DDTC program, which is a drug demand treatment center. So it's no different than somebody planting termites in your backyard and then coming over and saying, hey, you know, I get rid of termites. I think it's completely unethical. It's disgusting. I'll tell you what, I worked for the VA. I would not get seen at a VA hospital. I'll pay out of pocket.
Well, you know, I have a relative who's right now currently a GS-12 with the VA, and you know, the backlog is obviously enormous, right? That they're dealing with now with vets.
Oh yeah.
But man, it is. You know, I'm not going to say any specific details, but it is cookie cutter widget. I mean, they're making widgets. That's it, man. You're not a person. You're a widget, and you need to be shuffled through the system. You know, we have to have this quota, this many people done. So I agree with you. I mean, I think the VA has, you know, there's a lot of veterans who are getting help, especially financial help, through the VA, and I think these guys are owed this without a doubt, guys and gals. Yeah. But as far as whole care, yeah, I'm with you. I wouldn't belly up to that system.
And it's not to say they're all that way. It's just I know how it works behind the scenes, and it's like the perception. You know, that was my perception working there for almost 2 years, and for me, if I had to go to the VA, it would be that VA. So.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, Meghan, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on, sharing your stories with us. We're not going to wait 3 months to get you on here again. We'll get you on sooner next time. Sugar Decoded. You're very welcome. SugarDecoded.com is her website. Please check it out. Please enjoy Jeff Rins because he's coming up next. Tomorrow night, 2 hours of Karen's Corner. So tune in and support her. All right, guys, have a good night. We'll talk to you on Monday. Peace.